Hi, I'm Dre Harrison, and this is an episode of Motorsport 101 where over on this show we are a family-friendly podcast. RJ, mind your fucking language! Anyway.
Why my fucking language? What are you fucking doing fucking swearing in this fucking podcast, god damn it? Jesus fucking Christ, dude. Every time I get in trouble for this fucking shit.
Welcome back to Motorsport 101. Let's see how well I can put the bleeps in post-production. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 545 of Motorsport 101. I'm your friendly neighborhood host, Dre Harrison. Glad you could join us as ever for another edition of the show. And we are talking about F1 in Singapore. Mostly F1 in Singapore. Because, I mean, let's be honest with each other here, listeners. Most of the interesting stuff happened off the track. This was a clunker of a Singapore Grand Prix. Probably the worst one of the, I want to say 13, 14 we've had now since Singapore debuted in 08. I know we missed a few because of the pandemic and all that, but it wasn't a fun time. And yeah, the track with the 100% safety car record has fallen. We had a safety car free Singapore Grand Prix, which kind of says it all, really. About that one, as far as I'm concerned. Joining me, and it's just him on this occasion, we're buddying up on this occasion. Cam Buckley will be back tomorrow for our MotoGP review, because that was a very interesting Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. Is Mr. RJ O'Connell? How's it going, RJ?
Glad to be back, as always. I apologize for my language. I'm just here on this occasion so that I don't get fined.
It's an important point. You have technically attended this podcast taping, so you will not be fined 2 weeks' wages. I'm very proud of you for showing up on this occasion. But you've been a bit busy this weekend. What were you up to?
No comment. Okay. I was like up to my ears in sports car stuff. IMSA and Super GT were on this weekend, so I had to cover that up, and that's why. Only minutes ago did I catch up on everything that I missed out of the Singapore Grand Prix, and by the sounds of it, it was like not much that I didn't already hear about. Lando Norris completely whooped everybody's butt from start to finish, and yet we're still poking holes in his performance.
It's what we do here. We are podcasters, derogatory. It's what we do here. Although, I must admit, I actually did tune in and watch pretty much all of the Battle of the Bricks for IMSA this past weekend.
That's right, you were bricked up.
BMW, having never won since coming back as a sports car entity. A 1-2 finish?
You're missing an important piece of context, because earlier that week was the Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing raid
on
their Indianapolis facilities. And what does BMW M Team Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing do in the first event they have after that raid? Finish 1-2 overall at the 6 hours of Indy.
So you're telling me all they needed was a bit of government interference and pressure, and all of a sudden it all just clicks into place?
I think it just helps if they don't take the data off the worst Andretti's car, allegedly.
Allegedly. I mean,
the jokes were crazy after we stopped recording. Because we found out that RLL, the IndyCar team, got raided because of suspicion of corporate espionage involving themselves and Andretti Global.
We were wondering what's been the cause of the FBI having a raid, and then we found that out, and we were like, so let me get this straight. You copied data from an ex-Andretti employee, and you somehow got worse at ovals? How did that happen?
It's magic, I guess. But yeah, this was one of those great comebacks over adversity, fighting the demons and triumphing over the self-made hardship. Classic sports tale.
Yeah, the tale as old as time. All we need is Kevin Costner to play Philip Eng in the movie, and then it's all complete. Happy go lucky. We all go home. In a cornfield somewhere in Indianapolis. But yeah, that was a thing. But yeah, we'll be talking obviously about Lando Norris and arguably the least impressive dominant victory you'll ever see in F1 because Lando Norris at times looked like he was trying to lose this race. We got to talk about FIA unseriousness again, unfortunately, because we had a huge, I say huge in inverted commas, a huge swearing scandal over at FIA HQ over Max Verstappen and bad language in a press conference. It was not great, to say the least, and we'll try and break down all of the nitty-gritty that came from that, and potentially a quite sad and empty career ender. We may have just seen the last Grand Prix of Daniel Ricciardo without even realizing until during the weekend itself. It's all very weird. Again, we'll try to make sense of it over the next 45 minutes or so. But if you're joining us, thank you for listening in. Much appreciated. Places you can find us real quick. Well, maybe on Twitter for not much longer if Elon Musk tries to eliminate the block function, the galaxy-brained Nimrod.
He is so gonna get yelled at.
Well, Apple's going to take him into an empty room with a couple of security guards on either side, and, well, you know how that story ends. Anyway, if you want to follow us on Elon Musk's failed business investment that he's trying to get taken down via terms of service, you can do so at motorsport_101, and our personal handles are at Dre Harrison 101 and at RJ O'Connell. You can also check us out on youtube.com/motorsport101, Facebook / at motorsport101, Instagram motorsport101pod, and our website motorsport101.com, where you can get some extra written notes about this Grand Prix weekend. I think, it was so bad that the swearing was actually the main event topic. True story. That and the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. See if you can count how many Tekken references I managed to get into that article. It was a fun time. So check that out if you haven't already. And if you really like us, you can back us financially on Patreon. Patreon.com/motorsport101. $5 gets you early access to all of our content, including some of our pocket notes and some of our written content as well. Goes up on there early. You can hear some exclusive words from me on the departure of Rinus VeeKay. Big news coming out of IndyCar. Genuine shock coming out of IndyCar this weekend that Rinus VeeKay is leaving ECR, and apparently a certain former Indy 500 winner may be joining them in the very near future. More on that soon, probably during our season review, likely next week. And of course, if you got back at the $10 level, you can join the supporters club of our Discord server. We can listen to the episodes live as they are being recorded, as Jason and Ghost Raptor are doing so right now in our chat. Thank you very much, folks. Hope you enjoy the show as ever. And let's get down to it. After this quick musical interlude, we will talk the Singapore Grand Prix.
Now, you've been getting back into Gran Turismo 4 lately, obviously, with Spec 2 mod being released. It's so good. But we're not here to talk about Gran Turismo 4. We're here to talk about the Singapore Grand Prix. People told me that this is the least impressive, most impressive win of all time. Lando Norris finished just the fastest lap away from a Grand Slam victory, or Grand Slam victory, if you're the most insufferable kind of a person in Formula One fandom. Anyway, he won Singapore. He led every lap. He won from pole, 21 seconds ahead of Max Verstappen a second. And by the way, Max Verstappen a second, when you consider how down people were about this car going into the tracks that Red Bull seems to suffer at the most, second place might be great. Oscar Piastri was third. McLaren's now won 3 out of the 4 races since the summer break ended, and Lando Norris reduced the championship deficit to 52 points. And yet, with 3 separate near misses with disaster, was this really the most impressive, least impressive, dominant win in recent times that he just barely squeaked away with?
It's a strange performance, I think is how I described it. I mean, there was no hope or hype or trying to promote this Grand Prix going into it. I remember seeing the pre-race coverage on F1 TV on the grid, and Lewis Hamilton, who had qualified, actually had a really good qualifier, so he qualified third for this race. turned around and said, we're not racing for the win. Lando Norris should walk it if he gets to start right. We're racing for third. And he ended up fifth. It was just one of those sorts of days where everybody knew if Lando got away clean, he would win at a canter. And he did.
For once, that trope has been busted. Lando Norris got a clean start off the line and held the lead through the first sequence of corners.
First time in 8 attempts, he has started a race or a sprint in the number one position, and he's actually led the second lap. First time of asking. Well done, Lando. We've made some progress. Look, he was so good, so fast, so dominant out there when he needed to be. I remember that radio message about 5 laps in where Will Joseph, his race engineer, tells Lando on the radio, look, do you mind if you can crank this lead up to maybe 5 seconds by the teens in terms of laps wise? Because we just got to be careful of the undercut in case Max tries something. By the time we get to lap 15, it's like 10 seconds. He had pace at will. He had, I think the gap at one point peaked at about 29 seconds. It was ridiculous how fast he was going. And yet, he very nearly binned it 3 times. There was 2 wall brushes, and a third time he went wide at that penultimate chicane sequence and nearly hit the outside wall there as well. Like, Lando came very close to disaster 3 times over. And, like, the worst part was that Norris didn't even admit he was pushing. He said he just wanted to win with as big a margin as possible, which I thought was just... Okay.
Yeah, the big one is lap 30. He's heading out of 13 onto Connaught Corner. That's 14. That's the right-hander that leads into into what used to be one of the clunkiest ass sections of racetrack ever. Thank goodness it's gone. Don't at me. That it's better now. It is much better now. But I'm getting sidetracked here because he's heading down to the corner. He brakes. He locks up crazy. He still continues to steer into it while he's locking up, brushes the wall. Is very lucky he doesn't get stuck in the barriers or just thump them entirely.
Very light graze. There was some very minor front wing damage, but not enough to warrant a front wing change in the pits when he eventually did come in. So yeah, that was a bit of a heart attack. I love the best part of that was when we got the Max Verstappen podcast after the race was over and seeing them in the podium room together and Max wincing when he sees the footage that we saw in the highlight footage of Lando nearly stacking it. And then Oscar Piastri taps Norris on the shoulder and goes, without using swear words, how did you feel in that moment? And Norris just says tight. It was a great little moment. Piastri's a quite witty young man. It's a nod to him on that one. It was a very funny moment there. One of the best press room moments you'll see all year.
Lando Norris had the Monaco 1988 experience that Ayrton Senna had, but he doesn't chuck the car completely into the barriers and sulk back to his hotel room.
Yeah, that would have been... I mean, the narratives would have narratived hard.
Oh, my God.
If Lando Norris
crashes
out. If he crashes out with a 26-second lead and puts it in the wall, good Lord.
And gives 25 points back to Verstappen in a car that, let's be real, should not have been anywhere close to winning this race.
If he stacks it and puts it in the wall and it's game over, it's championship over at that point. Like in my opinion, I mean, you'd be looking at the gap being nearer 80 points with 6 to go. Like at that point, you're thinking it's probably over at that point. And there is some significant maths that comes with this, which we'll get to a little bit later on. But I'll kind of half address it now. Because Daniel Ricciardo set the fastest lap of the race and Norris didn't get that bonus point for fastest lap, it meant that mathematically speaking, the championship is now out of Lando Norris's hands. Norris can go perfect the rest of the way, take every point left on the table, and Max can follow him home in second, and he would win the championship by 1 point. And by all accounts, it looks like Red Bull seems to be cautiously optimistic they may have figured out some of their car problems. We've got to remember, they were a donkey here last year. It's not even like Verstappen was like competitive here last year. They were awful. They were the fourth, maybe fifth best car that weekend at Singapore last year. And apparently them going back and being more aggressive on their car setup, i.e. not lifting their car super high up on ride heights to mitigate the bumps that Singapore has, actually made them a lot quicker. And that's crediting that. Basically, being more aggressive has basically led them to finish in second, when Horner was apparently quite nervous going into this weekend. It was going to be another, we may be fighting for sixth kind of deal, basically. So, big weekend, like a big damage limitation weekend for Verstappen in the championship.
Dre, I don't understand. You mean to tell me that the car that won 21 out of 22 races was worse around here this time last year than a car that Cult MV is out here saying is just the worst bag of shit that's ever been fielded out of a Formula One track? Pardon my language, by the way. I don't want to segue into that just yet, but I did find it crazy that as it stands right now, Max Verstappen's lead has been cut down to 52 points.
52.
After Lando Norris won the Miami Grand Prix, the gap between him and Verstappen was 53. So out of all of this, and this is the thing, I guess the reason why people don't believe in Lando Norris that much, he's taken a net 1 point out of the margin
from Miami. Exactly the same. It's exactly the same because he didn't get the fastest lap point. So it's the gap after Lando won in Miami was 52.
53.
So you can make an argument that McLaren's had a car that's been competitive enough to win for about 12 rounds now. And in that time, Lando Norris has taken 1 point out of Verstappen's lead. It goes to show you, one, just how well Max has driven, because he's barely put a foot wrong given the cars he's been given these weekends. He's not really had an awful weekend. And the incompetence of McLaren for having a car that really probably should have won 8 or 9 of these, I'd argue, out of the 12, and they've got 5. Like, they've not... We've talked about it on the podcast many a time already, that just McLaren just are not... They're going to win the Constructors now. That's more than obvious. They've got 40-plus points in that regard over Red Bull and about 70 now on Ferrari after their Horlicks of a weekend. But the drivers...
5th and 7th for Charles and Carlos, man. Could have been more. Could have been a lot more.
Qualifying went to shit.
Qualifying's so important. That's why Red Bull was so compromised here last year, I feel.
It probably was a big part of the problem. I think part of the reason why Oscar ended up like 40-odd seconds behind his teammate was because Piastri was stuck staring at a Mercedes for 3/4 of this race. Like, track position is everything in Singapore. Not only is it for position, but also for clean air. For the sake of clean air, you can go so much faster in Singapore. Following people around here, it's arguably the worst track in the sport for following people around. And that's probably what did the damage, because Ferrari, they botched it in qualifying. Carlos Sainz was a bit overzealous on his warm-up lap, puts it in the outside wall, does his best Lance Stroll impression from last year, and Charles Leclerc just could not get heat into his tyres to set a qualifying run. It's classic Ferrari, where they've not been able to get their tyres in the operating window. It's been a huge part of this season's development, where if you're off the boil, like, you're in bad shape. And I think Ferrari had a very quick race car this weekend, and they ended up coming away with 5th and 7th, and that pretty much rules them out of the Constructors' Championship now. I think they had an outside chance going into this race weekend. I think they could have got at least one car on the podium this weekend, but unfortunately, because of their bad qualifying, they're now fighting for second, I think.
I guess with this result, like, McLaren doesn't have to worry about which driver to back in the championship, ?
Well, Lando's pushed that gap back out to 42 again. I mean, Oscar's going to have to play second fiddle now, surely. I mean, the questions have written themselves here. I mean, Piastri is good, but Piastri, again, qualifying has been his weakness all year. If he was the car in front, he'd be able to probably make much more of a defining argument about whether he should get team orders calls or not. But all year long, he's qualified behind Lando. And when you're the second car in the queue, it looks really bad if you're favoring that second car. So for McLaren, it's kind of written itself into a corner now. And maybe we all overreacted to the situation after what happened in Italy with papaya rules and what have you. But it was a fair question to ask, given how much McLaren have over-egged the pudding when it comes to having such a great package and a great car, but not fully utilizing it. That's how I look at it anyway.
Because they're not yet drilled enough to win championships. I would certainly hope that if they have a package that's good enough this time next year, that this will have hardened them.
Oh,
but,
yeah. I think it will.
Yeah, this is really a struggle getting across the line. It makes me think, like, God, would people have been this merciless if Mika Hakkinen found new and inventive ways to almost throw away back-to-back championships at this same team 25 years ago?
Oh, to be even I remember as a kid, Hakkinen got rinsed for some of those bad days he had in 98 and 99. I remember the Monza spin where he beaches the car and he's in the bushes in tears afterwards because he thought he'd blown it. He got roasted for that one, especially because Michael Schumacher fans back then on their dial-up internet was toxic as all hell. But I think, look, it's sports. We like to chop people down when they have bad days, especially when you're English, especially when a lot of F1 fans in this country are English, and a lot of them grew up Schumacher fans. I was one of them. So it happens quite a lot in there. It's the very nature of elite sport. It's built on a healthy foundation of hate. As I always say. So
absolutely, and it's crazy to me how quickly Lando Norris has gone from being like universally regarded as the pound for pound best driver to a guy who just can't get it done in the clutch.
But it is kind of weird how the narrative's been narrative. And I think that whole 52, 53 point swing since Miami, it's an easy stick to beat Norris with because, I mean, look, this is the first. The empathetic side of me thinks this is the first time Norris has competed for a championship, genuinely, and I don't think it's all on him. I think the big problem with McLaren was the first 5 rounds, the first 5-6 rounds of this championship where they were not anywhere near as competitive as Red Bull was. That ultimately has done far more damage to a Norris title campaign than any team orders scandal you could or couldn't have had over the course of this season. But, and on the other side of the coin, you have to be critical of some of Norris's execution. The starts have not been great. McLaren, I think, still puts too much onus on him from a strategic standpoint. I think they put far too much in the hands of their drivers when they've got the telemetry, they've got the data, they have the numbers. They are much more informed to make a decision than Lando does half the time. And Lando's not good at that. He's not a Carlos Sainz. He's not a Sebastian Vettel. He's not a Lewis Hamilton who have just this sixth sense when it comes to track conditions and perception. And I think as a result, it's left Lando open to some valid criticism. So it's kind of a weird one, this. I think you're right, RJ, in that people are very, very quick to turn on people. People love a good narrative buster. People love a good back and forth swing. People believe in momentum. People believe in dunking on other people when they're not having a good day. It's a very British sports media thing. It's a very American sports media thing as well over your side of the pond as well. So I think like with most things in life, the reality is probably somewhere in the middle. But unfortunately, most people, when it comes to discussing Formula One, don't like middle grounds. They like having strong stances one way or the other, and that's just generally how it goes.
There's no room for wishy-washiness, and I guess to what extent, I don't know if it's actually true, but it seems like Lando Norris has a unfortunate tendency to give people bulletin board material.
Oh yeah, the thing is, I think the thing with Lando is he has something that I, as a Brit, like to call sneaky little shit syndrome, where he can be very petty and quite bitchy in some of the comments he makes to the media and to the press. I've spoken to many journalists who are in that paddock who've said and echoed the same sentiment. He can be very catty with people, and he likes to dangle morsels to the end up on the media board. And again, there's people on social media that are very committed to their stances and their social media footprints who will see statements, who will see mistakes. If you're a Verstappen fan, if you're a Hamilton fan,
they pounce on weakness like
oh,
we
yeah.
are sharks. We are goddamn sharks out here.
And Norris doesn't do himself any favors sometimes with that. He does. He can sometimes be problematic in the sense of not like genuinely problematic, but just problematic in he doesn't realize he's giving away, as you said, I think that's a great way of saying it, bulletin board material. And that's just not ideal. It's people are going to dunk on you that much harder when you're throwing them up the alley-oop and asking LeBron James to dunk it. That's what's going to happen sometimes.
But, he wasn't even the one person that was getting dunked on most throughout this weekend. Enter FIA president Mohammed bin Sulayem, who has been on a crackdown against drivers swearing on the radio in his latest crusade as FIA president. Max Verstappen actually took a community service penalty by swearing during the Thursday press conference when he said his car was, quote, fucked. This was off the back of Ben Sulayem comparing said bad language to rappers going into the weekend. The exact quote is, and I quote, "We have to differentiate between our sport, motorsport, and rap music. We're not rappers, They say the F word how many times per minute? We're not on that. That's them, and we're us." Man, so you have got a lot to say about this, I'm sure. I've got some things that I want to say. And also, Verstappen retaliated the rest of the weekend by basically pulling a Marshawn Lynch at the 2015 Super Bowl. He gave no more than 2-word answers in FIA press conferences for the rest of the weekend. Anytime he talked to the press was just like away from the FIA and FOM cameras in his own print me in a debrief after qualifying and the race. Gotta say it. Mohammed bin Sulayem has fumbled the bag so catastrophically that the next time we get a new FIA president, we are going to get the biggest Formula One management kiss ass that you could possibly conceive of having.
Once upon a time, I was genuinely optimistic for Mohammed bin Sulayem as FIA president over Graham Stoker at the last FIA election. I didn't want another FOM kiss ass from the Bernie side of the sport to become president. I was actually genuinely glad that bin Sulayem won that presidency in 2021. I mean, he was thrown in. Don't get me wrong, he was thrown into the fire after what happened at the end of that championship season. That wasn't on him, as people still like to point out. Like, oh, he's just going to come in and just give Hamilton the 2021 title as if nothing happened. No, that wasn't on him. That wasn't under his jurisdiction. Yeah, and I'll give bin Sulayem this. He has done a genuinely good job of trying to raise awareness and help out motorsport clubs in more underdeveloped regions. He's done a genuinely good job of putting more women into powerful positions. However, I've said this before and I will say it again. Mohammed bin Sulayem is horrendously tone deaf at realizing how off the boil he can be with his comments. Now, a small part of me, will give him a small mitigation in that he is 62 years old and he's not one of the Western world sort of people that we are. When he comes from a very different culture. However, and this is a big however, this is not the first time that this man has said bigoted bullshit during his presidency. We all saw the website comments that came out on his old site where he called women intellectually inferior to men. And that was bad enough. That would be enough to get some people stepping down from their roles. He ultimately got away with that. But this is a man who's already had a cease and desist from Formula One management who lawyered up over the potential sale of the sport. And now he's cracking down on swearing. And here's the thing, right? There's a legitimate discussion you can have about this. There is. Formula One is ultimately a family-friendly product. As much as people don't want to admit that, kids are watching. Kids will be watching. If you're a sport, you want kids to watch you. You want to raise that next generation of fan. Of course, any sports league who says they're not is lying to themselves, right? That's why we have censorship in major sports leagues. On the other hand, you have to understand these are 20 of the best race car drivers in the world driving 1,000 horsepower, 210 mile an hour race cars. They are going to curse when they fuck up every once in a while.
Dude, yeah, absolutely. Like, if you think Mohammed bin Sulayem is mortified whenever Max Verstappen or Carlos Sainz or whoever is just high-strung on the radio, letting off a string of expletives, buddy, if you played any of the Bush brothers, Kurt and Kyle from NASCAR, their radio meltdowns from their prime years, their prime years of hot-headedness, that might put him into a coma.
Yeah, the old segment of Kyle Busch, Radio Sweetheart. Yeah, I remember those days, and I'm not even a big NASCAR guy. And unfortunately, once again, it came down to F1's only self-appointed, plugged-in moral compass, Lewis Hamilton, who pointed out the racial connotations of comparing swearing to rappers. Because if you're making out that swearing is a bad thing, and you're comparing it to rappers who, and let's not play dumb here, the vast majority of rappers are black, call it what it is. If you're saying that swearing is bad, you're implying that a major staple and part of black culture is bad. It is something that a lot of people will call racist. And there's a valid argument you can make for that, and I would not argue with you if you claimed that. It is a very, at best, poorly worded, ignorant statement, and on the worst, it's that. And it sucks, first and foremost, and I've said this many a time on this pod and on the website, it really shouldn't have to come down to Lewis Hamilton to point this shit out every single time.
Hamilton hit the nail on the head, but you're right, it shouldn't always come down to him. Hamilton said, with what he said, I don't like how he's expressed it. Saying rappers is very stereotypical. If you think about it, most rappers are black. So it says, we're not like them. So I think those are the wrong choice of words, and there is a racial element there. Yeah.
And that's the thing. Hamilton agreed with Ben Sulayem to a degree. He said that, we probably shouldn't be swearing on the radio so much. When was the last time you heard Hamilton curse on a team radio?
God, it would have had to have been in like the peak years, because Hamilton's worst trait is that he is a cranky winner sometimes. He is high-strung. He feels like everything is falling apart around him when he has the entire thing in control. That's about it.
Yeah.
But not lately.
And he doesn't swear. He doesn't swear in press conferences. He doesn't swear in interviews. He doesn't really swear at all, because he's always conscious of trying to be as family-friendly as possible, because he knows children could be watching. He's the walking embodiment of Ben Sulayem's point. And yet, Ben Sulayem has worded it so clumsy, he's come off as the bad guy. And yet, because of Verstappen's, in my opinion, over-the-top reaction, I think Ben Sulayem's kind of gotten away with it again here. Because Verstappen, in his response to all of this, and I think it's a bit bullshit that, one, the FIA gave him a community service penalty when Fred Vasseur and Toto Wolff did this at Vegas last year and only got a warning. Verstappen apologized when he had the stewards hearing about what happened, and he was still given the same community service he got when he pushed Esteban Ocon after a race was over.
I like that they gave him mitigating circumstances because English wasn't his native language.
Please. He's Dutch. It might as well be. Like, the Netherlands is the one country where you can curse before the watershed. Get out of here with that nonsense. It's complete bullshit. I mean, I don't know how he got away with that, but the problem I have with this is that Verstappen's reaction in response was completely OTT. He said sorry during the press conference. After the press conference was over, he accepted his punishment, and then he goes and has a strop gives the FIA a bunch of one-word answers, and then has the media go on a wild goose chase. I think it's nonsense. Like, it was so... Like, Max needs to understand. Choose your battles. And this goes for both sides, in my opinion. This is not a fight you're going to win, Max. I'm sorry. It says everything about this sport is now broadcasted. And that's partly our fault as fans. We wanted press conferences to be aired on TV. We got it in the UK on Sky Sports F1. We wanted testing to be televised, even though testing is the most boring shit you could ever watch in Formula One. It's now televised.
But we crave content.
We crave content. Every morsel and crumb of Formula One that we can consume is all over social media. There's drawbacks to that. And part of the drawback is, if it's going to be televised, you cannot swear. That's just that's how this goes in every sport. Whether you like it or not, whether you think it's cool or funny or getting a headline out of it, there are rules in place for a reason.
There are rules. I don't disagree with that. But at the same time, you got to think that, like, this surely is, like, not even in the top 15 to 20 biggest issues that Formula One is facing in 2024 and beyond. But
it's the thing, though. That's the easy trap that fans have got themselves into, because it's exactly the same as Lewis Hamilton and the jewelry story of 2022, right? Where it was like, oh, can't wear jewelry. That rule had been in place for 15 years prior to Hamilton being told to take his nose stud out or take his jewelry off. But yeah, because it was a fresh off the back of a Hamilton gets screwed scandal, everyone's like, we're not going to hear this bullshit now. You're targeting Lewis Hamilton because he wears bling and jewelry. And I'm like, if you think Lewis Hamilton is the only person who wears jewelry in an F1 paddock, you're part of the problem. But the point I'm getting at here is the FIA was needlessly petty. And this is part of the issue. This is not a battle worth fighting. Drivers are going to swear every once in a while. It's a human thing. I don't see what you gain by making Verstappen do community service to make an example of him. And I say make an example because, like I said, there's been precedent for this before, and you didn't do a thing besides give him a warning. Why couldn't you just warn Max on this occasion? And if you warn him, this story is over. It's a quick giggle. We talk about it, we laugh about it on Friday during practice, and then we move on. Instead, Verstappen rises to the FIA's bait, and it becomes the story of the weekend. It was all silly.
Other drivers are pissed about it, Trey.
The GPDA, actively opened the statement saying, we're not happy with this rule. And I'm just like, here we go again. It's another political power struggle between Ben Sulayem, who made these comments, and the FIA against the sport's other stakeholders, whether it be FOM management, who, again, they have the power to choose what radio messages are broadcast and which ones aren't. They are the ones that should be taking or responding to the criticism, which, to a degree, can be valid. It's not a needless debate. FOM can just not air messages that have censorship in them.
Maybe Sky Sports could air an entire alternate broadcast devoted exclusively to children and younger audiences. Wouldn't that be something?
Funny that. It's almost like sports broadcasters are always going to be mindful of bad language because they don't want a bunch of complaints to Ofcom saying, why are you letting these people swear in front of the kids? That's how sports leagues work. That's how broadcasters in most countries in the world work. The FIA was always going to win this fight. Max had no good reason to make it almost seem personal to the point where he's talking about potentially quitting because he can't, quote, be who he is because he said fuck during the press conference one time. I mean, okay, really? It's all just so pointless to me. Every major party involved has been completely unserious in all of this. And all of this just seems so unnecessary. All the FA had to do was slap him on the wrist and say, don't do that again. Story's over. Instead, they give him a needless community service penalty, and then Max, because he has never seen a fight he hasn't picked, has to go and retaliate for the rest of the weekend. And now that becomes a headline story. It's all just dumb to me, RJ. It really is. It's just so pointless.
Do you think this is a thing we're talking about by the time F1 returns on October 20th for the United States Grand Prix weekend?
No. We've had 4 weeks off. We've had 4 weeks off by then. People are just going to be excited the sport's back. Did the jewelry story really stick around? It came up like one other time in 2022, and that's only because Hamilton's stud got infected. And then that was the end of the story because he was given a medical exemption for it. People come up with compromises and workarounds because that's what common sense normally prevails in the end, right? And it will prevail here, where Max will just mind his language, or the FIA will just say, no, really, please, could you just stop swearing in press conference? And eventually people will get the message.
Or Ben Sulayem will find another thing to like crusade against that really just is like, okay, you don't need to go at it this hard.
Comparing it to rapping, that was the best you could do? Really?
Yeah.
You couldn't have just said, no, there's kids watching, which is a perfectly valid point. Like, you had to go make it a black thing, didn't you? I mean, Jesus Christ. It's just so pointless. All of this was so stupid. For the president of a sporting council, how are you so bad at conveying your message? Honestly. Anyway.
It's like, he's not been very well media trained. Never was, and so far it hasn't been working. Put a pin in that story. But by the time we get back to Formula One at United States Grand Prix, perhaps one of the most popular drivers in the U.S. will not be racing anymore. Because while it's not been confirmed yet, there are rumors swirling that Daniel Ricciardo will have already driven his last race for Team Faenza, Visa Cash App RB, not at the end of the season, but at Singapore. He was very emotional in his interviews after the race, after being sent around to do the fastest lap at the end, which was the big difference between Lando Norris coming away with 25 points. Rumors are swirling. He got a guard of honor as it came back to the V-Carb hospitality unit and the garages. I mean, what do you make of this, Ray?
How are Red Bull so bad at this? Like, here's the thing, right? First and foremost, I'm kind of battling with my own hypocrisy to a degree here, because I on this very podcast said after Baku, why are we putting Kevin Magnussen back in the Haas if Ollie Behrman is this good and ready to go? Why not just give him the rest of the year as a head start? The difference between Kevin Magnussen and Haas and Daniel Ricciardo here is Daniel Ricciardo has been nowhere near bad enough to warrant a mid-season cut-in, in my opinion. Logan Sargent, you could probably make a valid argument for. K-Mag, again, given how good Nico Hulkenberg has been this year, you could maybe make an argument against Kevin Magnussen here.
In the case of Logan Sargent, as time goes on, like, I love me some Logan Sargent. And again, I was right to keep an open mind about Franco Colapinto. That is not a probably right to move on situation. That is 100% on the money. And with Behrman, absolutely. And I guess the big thing is, like, if they're going to do this now, it's all to get Liam Lawson ready for 2025.
That's what I'd like to think the reasoning is. I'd like to think the reasoning is that ultimately they just want to give Lawson every chance to evaluate him as a driver, give him another similar sample size to what he had last year when he had 5 Grand Prix when Ricciardo broke his metacarpal at Zandvoort. He'll get 6 here at the end of the year if this story is true and he is replaced. He'll get 6 races between now and the end of the year, and almost certainly a 2025 race seat in one of the 2 Red Bull teams. Who knows how Red Bull will get down at this point. Perez is safe for the rest of the year, but beyond that, who knows? We don't know. And because we all know that Red Bull can pull the trigger at any moment on this, and that's what makes it so susceptible. But this rumor only really circulated when we got to Singapore this race weekend that Ricciardo was going to get dropped mid-season. And like I said, Ricciardo's been nowhere near bad enough for a mid-season sacking, in my opinion. I mean, RB in general has been poor for the I'd say for a good few rounds now. Their upgrade packages have not worked. They've slipped in their power rankings chase. Haas are now closing in on them for 6th in the Constructors'
It's 3
Championship.
points now between RB and Haas.
Hulkenberg is single-handedly keeping Haas in that fight for 6th. And just generally speaking, they've scored 1 point in the last 4 rounds. And this was a team that was looking like they were going to be regular scorers, week in, week out when this season started. RB has slipped. And that's a team failure, not on Daniel Ricciardo. All elements of RB has slipped in 2024. So I don't think this is a performance-related culling. I think you're right. I think this is ultimately we're giving Lawson the best possible opportunity, which, okay, I can understand the reasoning behind that. But Daniel wasn't even aware of this. Not really when he got to Singapore. He was questioned about it, and he said, well, look, I know there's certain clauses in my contract that are about to come around. But he'd heard nothing about the possibility of him losing his seat. But the overriding, I don't know if he'd been told something over the course of this weekend, whether someone at Red Bull had a word and said, look, mate, it's over. This is your last one, or whatever. I don't know. But Ricciardo being so emotional, I mean, he was holding back tears when Lawrence Barretto was interviewing him after the race. I've never seen Ricciardo like that, ever, in the 12 plus years I've watched him in F1. He seemed like a man who was at peace with it and looked like a man who kind of knew it was over. It was and it made it's sad but also quite unsettling because we haven't got that closure as fans yet, because we don't know whether this is even true or not, because Red Bull have not communicated anything on this story yet. Horner said after the race, we're going to evaluate this in the 4-week gap between now and Austin. Are you? Are you really? Because the way have they made up their mind yet, and they're just waiting for a certain date to pull the trigger because that's when they can contractually do it? Maybe. Maybe legally they can't make a comment on that. That was my point, because I know Tomo made that exact same point on Twitter regarding this. Tom McCluskey, the F1 YouTuber. I would say check him out, but he doesn't need the help when it comes to subscribers or anything like that.
We need the help. Tom, throw the help our way.
Yeah, exactly. Shout out Tomo if you're listening. Unlikely, but if you're listening, Tomo, good content, buddy. He's an old mucker. But no, just generally, Tomo made the exact same point where, if this was the case, why did you not say anything about this to the media? Why was none of this made public? Is this a legal ramification? Because that was the thought that came into my head when I saw Tomo's comment, where it was this has to be legal. If that's the only logical reason as to why they've been so quiet about this. And yeah, I'd love to hear them explain the logic behind this, because there clearly seems to be a degree of disconnect between Christian Horner and Helmut Marko about driver management in their teams at this point, because we all know Ricciardo is Horner's guy, and Horner's given him every chance to, beat the narratives, to come back, to potentially get a Red Bull seat. Yeah, this whole thing was basically they got Nick DeVries the hell out of there and got Daniel Ricciardo in, partially to see if Daniel Ricciardo still had one more run in him to be an improvement over Sergio Perez. And the whole thing was predicated on the fact, he's just going to walk in and take over this team. Yuki Tsunoda, you had a good run, but it's time to know your place. And for the most part, over this last calendar year plus, since Ricciardo stepped in the team, it's not been that. It hasn't. So Yuki Tsunoda has probably been slightly better. He has absolutely improved as a driver in the last 2 seasons he's been in F1. But this is the problem I have with the situation. Horner has backed Ricciardo every step of the way. He's given him every chance to get his foot back in the door. Helmut Marko has wanted Liam Lawson since his debut run. And Helmut Marko's been the one telling his favourite media, the Inside Line podcast he's a regular guest on, all of the places he can that he's guaranteed and promised Lawson a seat for 2025. And this was after they'd already tied Tsunoda down for another contract for next year. So they'd already backed themselves into a corner on this one, where it's like you're either going to cull the man mid-season or cull Ricciardo at the end of the year, or you're putting Lawson. There's a clear disconnect between the two most powerful people in Red Bull's day-to-day operations, and the spillover is us as fans sitting there going, what the fuck are you guys doing? Like, we just don't know. And for me, part of the problem here as well is that Horner doesn't believe in Tsunoda. That's more than obvious to me. Like, the most sensible thing, in my opinion, that Red Bull could have done was, if you're going to cut Perez mid-season, put Yuki Tsunoda in the Red Bull seat. He's been the better
but they don't think it's that guy, and pretty soon they have like no reason to keep him because they're going into bed with another engine manufacturer, Ford. And the whole negative narrative around Tsunoda is that he's just a Honda guy.
But again, that doesn't make any sense, because Aston Martin, who are going to inherit Honda power units in 2026, they're going to keep their lineup because Alonso and Stroll are almost certainly going to be confirmed for that lineup when that season comes around, especially now Adrian Newey's in the house. So, like, if you think Alonso's
Adrian Newey's going to Aston Martin, that's crazy.
Small story, innit? But no, those have always been the narratives regarding Yuki Tsunoda, and I don't think it's been entirely fair, because Yuki has been a fair bit better in his last two F1 years than he has been in his first two, and I think that's probably been the issue. I think he was sketchy enough in his first 2 years where he probably put Horner off the boil, and he's never gotten over that since then, because I think the Tsunoda we have now, he's someone I would like to try in a Red Bull if the opportunity presented itself, but that's likely not going to happen. And because, again, of the Horner-Marco disconnect about how they evaluate driver talent, it spills over and they keep making questionable decisions.
And for what it's worth, I think Liam Lawson is overdue a full-time seat.
Absolutely. Look, none of this is to say that Lawson is not good enough or not willing or deserving of an opportunity. His 5-race cameo was all I needed to see for me to go, yeah, he belongs on this grid.
Yeah,
and none of this is Lawson's fault, and none of this is to say that Lawson is not good enough. Everyone in that Red Bull setup, even the drivers have acknowledged how good Liam Lawson is. He will get an opportunity one way or another. And I think that's part of the problem, because if that clause to promote him doesn't kick in, he's a free agent and he can go wherever he likes.
Yeah.
The downside.
The only problem is that, like, the only place that's left for him to go, there's no seats that are worth a damn, because unless Sauber shows me something in 2025 that they haven't in 2024, that is a bad situation. I think Valtteri Bottas is just going to re-sign there because they can't get anybody else. Are you kidding me? If you're a rookie driver, you want to start your career there? Forget it.
If you're Sauber, just keeping Valtteri makes the most sense. He's just a solid pair of hands, extra experience when the Audi switch happens, and a Bottas-Hulkenberg team can still fuck up the midfield in the right car. I think that's a very solid pair of drivers right there. It's a shame for someone like Franco Colapinto, who might end up becoming the Liam Lawson of the 2025 grid next year because of how well he's driven in his first 3 F1 races.
Over now for Gabriel Bortoleto, too, who looks like he's going to take his F3, F2 doubles straight to...
next? It's like, who knows at this point? Like, honestly, it's so wild that Gabriel Bortoleto is likely, has at least got a good chance of doing the F3, F2 back-to-back double as a rookie, and he's got no chance of an F1 seat. Wild. And that would be the 4th time in a row that season's champion in F2 doesn't get a seat straight away. 4 years running, going back to Mick Schumacher.
So Dre, I guess if this is the last time you see Daniel Ricciardo race, is he in the discussion of best drivers to never win a championship? And also, where did it all go wrong? Because I think, certainly in my view, like, just off of his 5 years at Red Bull alone, He's a first ballot Formula One Hall, a very good driver. He has 8 wins, stood on the podium 32 times. Like, those are really, really good numbers. There are world champions that have fewer wins than he does. Mostly because of the era they came up in.
It's a great question. I think you got it in one. I think you nailed it when you said it in our Discord server a few days ago. Daniel Ricciardo is a first ballot Hall of Very Gooder. The worst thing that ever happened to Daniel Ricciardo was that he broke out in a time where no one in a car that wasn't painted silver could win a championship.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest problem that the 2 biggest problems in Daniel Ricciardo's career was, one, he broke out when Mercedes were dominant, and the second one was he didn't want to be Max Verstappen's number 2. And both of these are completely valid reasons that would alter somebody's career.
Yeah,
Daniel Ricciardo is a fantastic race car driver. He's one of the top 10 best drivers of the turbo hybrid era, without question. 8 wins. I would argue he didn't have the best car in any of those 8 victories that he's won in Formula One. And on top of that, he's got. When I evaluate drivers on an all-time level, I like to evaluate X factors, and Daniel has one in that he was a terrific entertainer, one of the most stunning overtakers we've seen in modern day F1.
Yeah.
Sometimes he would send it from 20, 30 meters back on another car and find a move and find a way to get it done. He was a superb race car driver. And to this day, the only teammate that really kept Verstappen honest in his time together at Red Bull.
Red Bull misses a driver like that. That's why they probably thought they could get him back.
Yeah.
That this was all just a formality until they chucked Perez out for him, and it didn't play out like that.
Indeed, that's absolutely right, and that was partly because Daniel Ricciardo did not want to play second fiddle to a team that everybody and their mother knew was heading the direction of Max Verstappen. And yes, the money that Renault brought to the table was obviously a factor, because Renault paid him the most they've ever given to an employee. They wanted to build the team around Daniel, and it worked. His 2020 season was superb.
But the problem was, he already committed to leave by then because the results weren't coming. So what does he do? McLaren's on the upswing. He's going to go to McLaren. That's an entirely justifiable decision at the time.
Absolutely.
But that stint, that 2-year stint at McLaren, outside of one really amazing week in Monza, didn't work.
It's the old rumor that the McLaren car is a very difficult one to drive, and I think part of the reason why Norris and Piastri have been as good as they has been as drivers is because it's all they've ever known as F1 cars. They've been molded and groomed into that system, and it's made them the drivers that they are. Ricciardo walked into that team and got his ass kicked. There's no getting around it. It was the right move, but at the wrong time. And that's the story of Ricciardo's career. He went to Renault a year before they got good, and then he went to McLaren just as they peaked initially before coming down a little bit before they came this juggernaut they are now. And he joined a team where Lando was just starting to become the elite driver we now recognize him as. And
even somebody pointed out just like the move back to Team Faenza. You know, he could have stayed at Haas, but Haas at the time were just atrocious. Kind of a freaking mess. Yeah.
This was fresh off the back of Mazepin and Schumacher, a horrible car, delayed development, Gunther Steiner probably being a bit too big for his proverbial breeches, and then letting Mick go to the shock and aghast to the rest of the paddock to bring in Nico Hulkenberg. Don't get me wrong, turned out to be an inspired decision. But even so, Haas was a mess. Even for $10 million a year, that was not worth the trouble. Like, they were the worst team in Formula One back then. It was understandable. You may not want to go there, and you wait for the opportunity to come. And it did. Like, Ricciardo's decision-making was not the issue here.
Yeah.
It was, unfortunately, the timing. In Formula One and in sport in general, I'll give you a prime example of this. A very famous wrestler has talked about this a lot, Joe Hendry, and the nature and the timing of his theme song going viral and becoming a genuine UK number one in terms of a single. he said it himself when he was interviewed by by CVV, where he said, timing is everything in this industry. Timing makes or breaks you when it comes to knowing when to move, knowing when not to. And unfortunately, Ricciardo, like baseball, probably just struck out 3 times when it came to his big career moves, and it ultimately defined and ended his career. It's
John
a real
Lacey
shame.
with curly hair and a handlebar mustache sometimes.
Yeah, he's Jorge Lorenzo. He left the Yamaha at the wrong time to go to Ducati just as the results were starting to come through. They sacked him. And I think Lorenzo could have won a world title on that Ducati if he held out for a couple more years. Instead, he goes to Honda, and his career ends with him faking a retirement. It's the same principle. Timing is everything in this game. And it's a shame because it's blunted what's been an outstanding career. Like, if you've won 8 Grand Prix in Formula One and you've been top 3 in the championship on a couple of occasions, that's a damn good career. You're already in the 1% of F1 drivers of all time. That is an immense career in Formula One. And on top of that, one of the most charismatic and the fan base and the audience speaks for itself, one of the most well-liked and revered drivers of the modern age. Because, like, Ricciardo's got a huge following. He's one of I've said it before, forget Hamilton and Verstappen, who either didn't take part or have not been fully integrated into DTS. Daniel Ricciardo was the biggest winner of the Drive to Survive boom.
Yeah.
By a country mile. No one's profile was elevated more in F1 circles than Daniel Ricciardo's as a result of that show.
There are only 36 people that have driven Formula One cars as of today that have more wins than him.
It's rare. It's special company. Even winning 8 races is a remarkable achievement.
It gives him more than 6 previous world champions.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, didn't have the best car for any one of those 8 victories. He was a damn good driver. At times, I thought he was the best driver in the world in 2014 when he won some of those scrappy races against some of those busted Mercedes cars. Like, there are at times where I thought this guy might be him. While he didn't quite get to those dazzling heights, he's still an exceptional race car driver and one of the best I've seen in recent years. If it is the end, I sincerely wish him the best. And I hope he does something else cool, because he's one of those guys that seems to have a genuine outside motorsport interest. I could see him in a NASCAR stock car next year very easily. They've grown their game when it comes to getting guest drivers to do one-off appearances. I could absolutely see Ricciardo in a track house one day, or something along those lines. And I hope he does something fun, because F1 will be worse off without him. 110%. They don't make many like Ricciardo anymore.
Yeah. Absolutely. I agree. Do something fun, Daniel. Don't go on Talk To with Haley Welch.
No. Don't go and talk to her. Don't go on Barstool. Please. Do better. Okay? Besides that, you had a great run. If this really is the end, you had a great run, Daniel.
Come on, you gotta give him a send-off at Coda. You gotta give him... It's practically that's his adopted second country, man.
He basically is American. Like, just give him Austin. Like, what's the difference between 5 races and 6 if you're Liam Lawson? Just give it to him next week. We can wait. Give Ricciardo the send-off he deserves. I like Ricciardo, so fuck it. You give it to him.
Absolutely, man.
That'll just about do it for this episode of Motorsport 101. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back for episode 546 later on in the week with me, RJ, and Cameron Buckley. We'll be talking about MotoGP's second race at Misano, the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, and oh no, Francesco Bagnaia has crashed again. What is it with these dudes and bozo jeans? That overtake heard around the world because Enea Bastianini passes Jorge Martin for the win in controversial circumstances. We'll talk all about that later on in the week. But until next time, I've been Dre Harrison. He's been RJ O'Connell. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you guys next time. Sayonara.
Later, y'all. Bonza, mate.
Fuck off, O'Connell.